fine? Great. Okay, hi everybody, and welcome to this September 2022 Chaos member meeting. If you don't know me, my name is Sarah Brown. I am Chaos Coordinator, and I'm really happy to see all of you here today for today's meeting. So today's meeting topic is coordinated shoreline protection efforts, and we're going to be joined by two great speakers who will discuss efforts made in their communities to address shoreline hazards. Before we get going, I'll run through some Zoom etiquette very quickly. All of this is probably stuff we're all very familiar with, but I'll go over it anyway. Please do stay on mute and off camera during the presentations today. This helps to create a space for speakers that's quiet and helps preserve bandwidth. So if you have any questions or comments during any of the presentations, know that we do have a Q&A session set aside for both presentations, both speakers. When it comes to those Q&A sessions, you can utilize the chat function as displayed on this slide to ask your questions, and we'll do our best to field those questions as they come in. You can also raise your hand using the raise hand function, which is in the reactions button that you can see on your screen. And then once you raise your hand, I'll find you and call on you, and then you can come off of mute and turn on your camera if you'd like and ask your question that way. So before we go over the agenda for today, I just wanted to share some photos from the Chaos field trips that were held last month that were really exciting. So the pictures you're seeing here on the slide are from our August 18th field trip to Brighton Beach in Duluth, Minnesota. On this field trip, we heard from Mike LeBeau, who's actually one of our speakers today as well on a separate project. And Jim Schoberg from the City of Duluth on their plans to update the park as including relocating a section of road. So it was really cool. It was great to see some of our members both from Wisconsin and Minnesota that day. And if you happen to be here today and you attended this field trip, thank you for coming. It was really cool to meet you in person. I think overall it was just a great day, weather permitted. It worked out for us. We were worried for a while it was going to storm, but it worked out great. And meeting each other in person and discussing this Brighton Beach project and kind of networking around that was really cool to see. Our second field trip was on August 24th. And it was to Herbster, Wisconsin, where we visited the private property of Dan and Mary Schneider, who now own a property that has a house on it that was previously relocated away from an eroding bluff. And it was actually the same house that was featured at our last member meeting in June, if you happen to be there. We were joined by Scott Galetka from Bayfield County Land Records, and he was able to kind of do a drone flight ahead of time and show us a 3D model that he had created, some of the monitoring techniques that he uses. We were also joined by Tom Fitz, a professor of geoscience at Northland College, who joined us to talk about the local geology and erosion processes of the area. And then we also heard from Dan Schneider, the property owner himself, and he was able to talk about kind of the history of the property and then the history of the erosion that's occurred there. So it was a really cool experience. Again, thank you to those of you that were able to attend. It was really cool at both field trips to see the networking that happened. And I think people were happy to be somewhere in real life and not just virtually. So very successful and very glad to have been part of. And because these field trips were such a success and folks that attended both field trips seemed very enthusiastic, we're looking to continue hosting Chaos field trips moving forward, even in the months to come. So along those lines, I just want to take a moment or two, and I want to hear from all of you in the chat, if you would like to type something in the chat. Do you have any ideas off the top of your head for a site or a project that we could maybe visit and feature at a field trip this winter, maybe? So Karina, I don't know if you have anything to add, but November, December, early January kind of things. But Yeah, I want to hear from you. Type in the chat if you would, if you have any ideas of any sites or projects that are ongoing, anything exciting that we might be able to visit this winter for a field trip. And Todd, if you could help me with the chat. These do not have to be well-formed ideas. That's kind of where we're at as well. So just any projects that you might be aware of that seem really cool, that would be neat for Chaos members to go see in person. Do you have any brainstorming ideas for us?
Sarah, I'll just jump in. This is Karina. I just want to say I'll be watching for those ideas to come in throughout the meeting. So if you're hit with a sudden field trip idea, you can't wait to visit a site in December or January. It sounds like fun. Just drop it in the chat and I'll be watching. Thanks.
Yeah, anytime in the meeting. It doesn't have to be right now. Sometimes ideas come into your head later. Okay, I'm seeing maybe some thoughts here. And we don't have to wait or spend a lot of time on this or call them out. I want to hear your brainstorming. Okay, thank you for that. Great. Okay, cool. I'm going to keep rolling so that we can make sure we're on time for our speakers to go ahead and start, but keep throwing those ideas in the chat. We will notice them. Thank you guys. Okay. 1 second. So another thing I just really quickly wanted to remind you all of, if you ever want to access any of our past Chaos newsletters, any of our materials, slides, or resources that we shared during past member meetings, anything like that, you can visit our website. Chaos has its own website, and the link is on the screen here, and Todd is going to do me a favor and pop that in the chat as well. So if you're not aware we have a website, we do, and you can feel free to visit anytime. And if you already are aware, just a reminder to you that you can access our materials from past member meetings there if you would like. Also, as always, if you have any questions, suggestions, ideas for a field trip, or updates that you'd like to make at a future member meeting, anything like that, please always feel free to reach out to me. And my email's on the screen. Todd's going to pop that in the chat as well. But anytime, you're not going to bother me, just send me an email. I'm happy to hear from you. And I'm seeing some really interesting ideas in the chat. So thank you guys for doing that. It's great. So the agenda for today's meeting, as I mentioned, we're going to be hearing from 2 speakers today on coordinated shoreline protection efforts that have occurred in their communities. Sara Hudson from City of Ashland is here, and she's going to present first, and then her presentation will be followed by a Q&A. And then we'll hear from Mike LeBeau from City of Duluth, and his presentation will also be followed by a Q&A. Really quick, after the Q&A session, we have a solid block of time set aside to actually open the floor up to you all for sharing or discussing anything that you might like to share or discuss with other Chaos members. So we recognize that there's a lot of value in having a chance to share with or hear from each other. So we want to give you all time to do that. This is going to be new for us. We've not really done anything quite like this before. So when we get to that part of the meeting, just be patient and keep an open mind. No one's going to be expected or required to speak up during this session if you don't want to. If you feel like there's value in just listening, that's totally fine. And we aren't going to put you on the spot, but we wanted to provide some time for discussion. So I'll introduce that part of the meeting a bit more when we get to that time, but I just wanted to give you a heads up that that's coming after we hear from our speakers today. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to transition over to introducing our first speaker, Sara Hudson. So Sara Hudson, the City of Ashland Parks and Recreation Director, is here with us today to discuss the coordinated efforts made by the City of Ashland to address coastal hazards and increase public access to the Lake Superior waterfront. So, Sarah, if you would like to come on screen and share your slides, that would be perfect.
Got it. Thank you, Sarah. Let me
Take it away.
take it away. I got it.
Take it
Thanks.
away.
All right. Well, welcome all for joining us today. As Sarah said, my name is Sara Hudson, and I am the City of Ashland's Park and Recreation Director. I have been with the city for 16 years now. I started out as the activities coordinator for the city, and then became the director. And in my role here, I've started doing a lot of grant writing and really gotten involved in how to improve public access to our waterfront and working on our coastal hazards and our water quality here, since we are on Lake Superior and it's pretty special to us. So next slide. The City of Ashland, we just to go over some brief history for you and, get to know us a little bit. Our mission is always to promote the betterment of Ashland, and we do this by a thriving community that values its natural environment, its unique and diverse cultures, its way of life, and our stewardship to Lake Superior. The City of Ashland is pretty diverse. We maintain 22 parks, 11.5 miles of trails, 1 public boat launch, 4 public beaches, 10 playgrounds, 2 campgrounds, 1 skate park, and over 300 acres of parkland green space, and has about 6.5 miles of shoreline. Of that, 3.3 is actually publicly owned, which is pretty impressive for a community on the southern shores of the Chequamegon Bay and Lake Superior. And also create some interesting instances when the weather doesn't always agree to us, which we're going to get into right away. So over the past couple of years, since probably even before this, but 2016 is kind of when we started noticing something was happening with the lake. And that was probably the first time in my tenure here at the city that we were hit with a really big storm. And in 2016, we actually got 2 of them. 2012, as some people remember, Duluth was hit, and we got a little bit, and we've always gotten our Easters, but 2016 was really impactful for us. So on July 11th, there was a huge major thunderstorm that happened and a bunch of flooding that happened throughout Ashland County, and a little bit in the city. We weren't super affected by it. How we were affected, though, is that we couldn't leave Ashland. In order to get to Green Bay or Ironwood, we had to drive to Superior, go 53 south, 29 across, and then finally go all the way up. So a drive that should take us 40 minutes was going to take us 4.5 to 5 hours. So we were pretty isolated for a long time. A lot of our neighboring community members got flooded out, and it was pretty scary living here. 2 weeks later, though, is when we really got hit. Another storm came in, and a giant windstorm blew over a bunch of trees and really created some interesting aspects for us when it comes to public access. During that storm, the July 21st storm, our crews spent about 3 weeks after the storm cleaning up trees that were down throughout the city. We lost power for a few days. Sailboats were tipped over that were in the marina, and we had a big storm surge that then impacted our waterfront trail. Started to impact our waterfront trail. And that was when the first time I had UWC Grant come in and ask, so what do we do? How do I protect this great trail that we have that goes along our shoreline? And they gave me an idea. And then in 2017, a really big storm hit us. And that was October 27th. And I remember driving into work thinking, gosh, it's raining really hard and it's really blowing. And I didn't know anything was happening until I got into work and someone said, did you check out the highway? And I said, no. That day, water levels rose 18 inches. There was a giant storm surge along with a seiche and along with some barometric pressure changes. And all 4 lanes of Highway 2 were covered with Lake Superior. Crews then had to actually get out snowplows to remove all the debris that came through. And it was closed for a good day. Traffic couldn't come through and had to take the bypass around. From that storm, I should say, deposited about 18 inches also of new sand on Maslowski Beach. And you can see that in the bottom, that picture of the picnic table. That's how much sand was there. It was all the way up to the benches. It destroyed our waterfront trail, about probably a good mile of it out of our 4.5 miles. It flooded Maslowski Beach. It and it also impaired and made us have to take it down, was the Bayview Pier, which was a swimming and diving pier that we have on the east side of town. It took us months to clean up from that, years actually, because we're finally just getting it done. So along with those, we've also had two more major events that happened. In 2018, we had a major rain event. The city of Ashland received 3 inches of rain in 15 minutes. It's a lot of rain and something that nobody is ready to handle. Our awesome Pearson Plaza Park, which you can see right next to the precipitation map, that turned into an awesome water feature. Wasn't supposed to be a water feature, but it looked pretty beautiful. So that flooded, caused lots of damage to that park. Also, with that much water coming into the area around us, the bay was brown for about 6 weeks, meaning it looked like chocolate milk out there just from all the sediment and erosion that was happening. Then in 2019, we had another wind and rain storm event that happened in October again. We always said that the gales in November, or that gales come in November. They're starting to come in October. And that heavily impacted Maslowski Beach, which we were starting to rehab from the 2017 storm. And it kind of set us back one step, flooding areas that never used to have water in them, and then just pushing back the silt fence that you can see here. Something that also had been happening throughout the years is that with these major rain events, we also were starting to get a lot of sanitary overflows within the city, that our system has had and has some I&I issues in inflow and infiltration, meaning that our wastewater treatment plant couldn't keep up with it. And we would overflow into the bay, which we've been working on in the next couple slides. So in about 2019, we started implementing some coastal resiliency measures. We have been fortunate to get some grant funding to be able to help us out with this. For Maslowski Beach, the EPA awarded us a grant to help with our poor water quality that we had been happening there. And we were able to implement some green stormwater infrastructure so that we could increase or improve the water quality there, but also increase coastal resiliency by putting in some riprap. For Maslowski Beach, you can see in the center here, our pavilion. We had to raise the pavilion 6 inches. We also put in a retaining wall so that if and when ice heaves come or more storms, the pavilion doesn't go away. And we relocated our waterfront trail. It used to be right directly on the beach, and now it's to the back of the park so that people can once again access both sides of Maslowski Beach, because it's 2 public beaches on Lake Superior, and safely do it ADA compliant. We also had to rebuild one of our drinking fountains, which you can see on the bottom right-hand corner. Maslowski Beach is not only known for its beautiful white sand beach that we have here, but it also has 3 artesian wells that are available for the public to drink. A majority of our coastal resiliency stuff that we have done is a lot of riprap, which isn't the most ideal thing that we can do, but it's what we have found works the best for us. As you can see in the right-hand pictures here, we re-riprapped part of our already hardened shoreline to be able to rebuild the trail, which you can kind of see is starting to work here. And this is that section of Highway 2 that washed out and when the water was over Highway 2. You can see Maslowski Beach here again, another angle of it of the concrete sidewalk. So instead of using asphalt in some areas, we also switched to using concrete, since that can withstand more wet conditions. And then this year finally, and sorry, this picture isn't as good, but we were finally able to repair the section of waterfront trail that washed out through another grant funding. Also, what the city has been able to do is that since 2019, our Public Works and Utilities Department has spent a lot of time lining some of our old vitreous clay pipes, sanitary pipes, to ensure that we're reducing our I&I issues. And so over the past 3 years, we have lined about 11 miles of pipe, which doesn't seem like a lot, but it is quite a bit in our somewhat big city. We've also been able to replace about 2 miles of pipe. So those are 2 miles of street reconstruction projects, which end up being, I think, a total of probably about 20 blocks that we've been able to do, which that's pretty important to us. So that's what the pictures on the left are showing you. That helps us continue to improve our water quality and ensure that people can still swim. So now we're going to go to a little bit of public access because we have some pretty big projects that we've been working on. And I like showing this photo because it shows kind of Ashland's history. Ashland has been around since the 1880s as a city, but it's been around for many generations before that as a tribal gathering place, and then also as a trading fur post, or for traders fur post. This photo is from the 30s, and at that time, Ashland was a very industrial community. We had 5 ore docks that lined our shore. We had several log hoists and pulp mills that were on here. We had 3 coal docks, all serving a town of 16,000 people. Ashland right now is just under 800 or under 8,000 people. So when we were working with some of these coastal resiliency projects and our public access projects, we're really working with a post-industrial waterfront, which can have its challenges at times, but it also has brought us some really great opportunities that we've been able to utilize. One of the biggest projects that we started, and this has been going on for many, many years, is the Ashland Ore Dock redevelopment project, which is redeveloping an icon. Ashland is the Ore Dockers. That is our mascot, our high school mascot. And it is something that when you were driving home on Highway 2, headed east on Highway 2, it was the first thing you saw sticking out into the lake. And it was a very unique structure for how it looked and how it was constructed. So the Ashland Ore Dock was originally known as the Sioux Line Ore Dock. And it was 80 feet tall, 66 feet wide, and sticks out 1,800 feet into Lake Superior. It had a cathedral-like structure, and it was unique because of its construction of cribbing, concrete, steel, and then thousands of virgin timber pilings. It was constructed in 2 sections, the 1916 section, which is the section closest to the land, and then the 1923 section, which is the section that's the last 900 feet of it. The 1923 section is most unique because of the diamonds that are there. And if you look on the left-hand photo, you can kind of see these little divots that are in the bottom right there, and those are diamonds. They were built, they're actually hexagonal shapes, and they were built for wave attenuation, so that when the nor'easters came or high wind and wave and water, the water would come up and around them and go out, making sure the dock stood there. And they have worked because the dock has been there now for next year to be 100 years old, which is pretty impressive. The ore dock also was the livelihood of the city. Or iron ore from the UP of Michigan was Upper Peninsula, Michigan, was shipped here. It was put into ore boats that then went throughout the Great Lakes and helped, build our nation as we know it. In 2015, the city took ownership of the ore dock, or I should say the base of the ore dock. The superstructure was started to be torn down in 2013 because it was unsafe. The concrete was just starting to fall, and we couldn't save it. So right now, the 1,800-foot base is still there. We had a party to welcome everyone back on the dock since it was back on public. It was public property for the first time ever and open to the public. Many generations of Ashland are snuck out to the ends to fish, swim, jump off, just have fun. And we thought 100 people would show up for brats and root beer. We had 600 people show up for brat and dock party, and it was amazing to see how happy everyone was to be out there and just to experience what it was like on the dock. Right now, we've had some really great community partners who have helped us with the slow redevelopment, and I say slow because it's been a costly project, or it is a costly project. Some high school students made this Ashland Ore Dock sign. The letters are about 3 feet high by 3 feet wide, and they look pretty cool. And then behind it is the USGS research vessel, the Kai. It lives right next door on its own dock. In 2018, then we started the next redevelopment project on the Ore Dock, which is the 151 lookout. So it was where kind of a half bridge sticks out over the first 4 diamonds, as that you can see towards the end of the dock. And it also gave people a gathering space and put some amenities on the dock to be able to start making it ADA compliant. And our vision to be able to get out to the end. So the city contracted with a consultant to create a concept design and what the community really wanted to see. And what we overwhelmingly heard is that people wanted to get to the end of the Ore Dock. And so next year, in May of 2023, we are going to start construction on ADA elevated walkway that goes from the 1916 section all the way to the end of the 1923 section. We're pretty excited to finally make this dream happen. People will be able to get out to the end, they'll be able to fish in the diamonds and really just experience being out into Lake Superior. The next project that we're working on redeveloping is the Kerr Park redevelopment. Kerr Park, is a very large section on our waterfront. One of it is half of it is a campground. The other half was a Superfund site. It was a former Ashland NSP Lakefront Superfund site. That started being, it's been a 30-year process to get it cleaned up and remediated. And then now we're starting that redevelopment process. We've been working on this redevelopment process since 2010, coming up with pictures and really figuring out what we are able to do on a remediated site, which is not as easy as people think it is to redevelop a Superfund site. But what the community has told us is that they really want a new boat launch, and it's something that we do need. Our current boat launch was created in the 1980s, and it is no longer ADA accessible, or never was, and it's just slowly not meeting the standards that it needs to. So our vision and what we are constantly looking funding for is to build a new 2-bay boat launch that's here on the eastern side of the site, and then also to have some community green space, potentially some food truck courts, whatnot, on the eastern half of it. Here's the aerial showing the Superfund site. So the Superfund site in and of itself is about 16 acres. 6 of it was on land, 10 of it was on water. And it, what it was down there was on top of the bluff was a coal gasification plant. And so in this area that they had to dredge the water, dig up the land, and in the area was logs, creosote, coal tar, and also garbage, because in the turn of the century, that's where we threw everything. So it has been a really long and expensive project. But in fact, last night was our celebration with Xcel Energy of us officially taking ownership of the land. So it is now, once again, open to the public and being able to be used. In 2021 and finished this year, we actually put in a new parking lot. So you can kind of see this brown area that's right over here that was paved. This year it got its second coat of asphalt on. So we now have a 42 space boat parking area, and then a thoroughfare that connects Ellis Avenue and Prentice Avenue once again. And it's pretty cool. And then public access trail that goes on an old railroad corridor so that people can easily get from A to B again. Our next project that I'm going to highlight is our Bayview Pier project. So in earlier slides, you saw the Kitty Wampus Pier that got destroyed in the 2017 storm. Prior to this storm coming, we were working on plans to help redevelop the Bayview Pier, as it was always a constant struggle between people who wanted to swim and people who wanted to fish. And the Bayview Pier is built on pilings of an old ore dock, actually ore dock number 3, that was at Bayview Park. So we worked with a consulting firm to create, some drawings and some designs to being able to help us make our visions come into reality. Here are some existing conditions. I believe these are from 2015, I believe, is actually when these photos were taken, just showing the state of the pier. What we also wanted to do was make it ADA compliant so that people could access from the parking lot all the way down to the end of the dock. People could, being able to get to it, anyone could. So in 2018, we started this project and we built a new Bayview Pier. We have one side for swimming and then one side for fishing and viewing. And it's one of our most popular amenities that we have. We have always had a diving board on the Bayview Pier, and the diving board is back. So visitors and community members it's a beach there, and they can swim and dive off the diving board and climb back up. So it's been a really popular and community asset that we've been able to do. And that is the last project I'm going to highlight. One thing I wanted to mention is that we've also been able to repave some of our trail system in town this year through our funders. A DOT grant helped us repave some of our waterfront trail, and then also Trail by Bayview Pier. And on this last slide is all our partners that have been able to help us through these projects. I did some quick math right before this, and we have received about $2.8 million in grants to be able to make these projects happen. And so without these people, these wonderful agencies, we wouldn't been able to do any of this. So I thank you. My contact information is on here. If you have any questions, get a hold of me, and then we have Q&A after this. So again, thank you very much.
Thank you so much for this, Sarah. Thank you for being here. Thank you for taking time out of clearly a very busy schedule to talk with us today. I want to open up the floor to anybody who has any questions for Sarah at this time. If you want to share any of those questions in the chat, we'll do our best to field them. And if you would rather come off of mute and come on camera, you could do that as well by using the raise hand function. So thank you, Sarah. Your pictures are great to look at. Any questions for Sarah? Now is the time. Okay, I have one question. How was the Bayview Pier designed to withstand future storms?
Oh, that's a good question. Ironically, when we were building it, that's when water levels were at the highest they've ever been in Lake Superior. So we actually increased its height by a foot. I believe it is a foot higher than it's supposed to be. We also put, again, a lot of riprap down below so that to be able to withstand the storms. For some reason, I will say that we haven't had a lot of ice shove with it. And so I think we're also high enough above the water level and that's what we thought about when it was coming with these storms. So we increased the height, we've increased the resiliency by putting some rock down below it. And then a lot of the old pilings that are still there from the ORDOC are kind of in front of it to help block it.
Any other questions for Sarah? We have maybe another minute or two if we have any questions now, or you may think of more as we go on, but any questions for Sarah, we'll do our best to give you time to ask those if you want to ask now. Got another one in the chat. Do you have any examples where you've used living shorelines?
I don't, and that's been one of our challenges, is that a lot of our shoreline, because it's post-industrial, has been really built up already, and they've been hardened shorelines. We are working on a project with the Thriving Earth Exchange to work on a plan to do that within the Bay City Creek estuary. So Bay City Creek is a sub watershed that runs through the center of Ashland, and that's been heavily impacted since its beginning. There was railroad trestles and railroad cars that went through it. It's a very cool area, but I am hoping that with that plan, we're going to be able to use some living shorelines to help that part of our shoreline, because that is a peninsula. That's the remnants of an old lumber company that's there. So those are in the works.
Okay. I want to give you guys time to ask questions. So if you have any other questions, you can pop them in the chat now, but if not, I'll give you maybe 10 more seconds and then we'll move on to our next speaker just to make sure we stay on time. But again, Sarah, thank you so much for being here. And clearly, like I said, clearly you are very busy. So we appreciate you taking time to talk to us today.
Thank you.
Okay, not seeing any more hands raised or questions in the chat. I'll go ahead and move on. If we get more questions for Sarah, it doesn't mean we won't have time to answer them. We can roll back around, and then it looked like Sarah provided her email on her slides. So if you want to pop that in the chat, Sarah, and then if folks have more questions that they think of later, they can reach out to you directly. That would be great. So with that, I'll go ahead and transition over to our next speaker. We're going to hear from Mike LeBeau, the City of Duluth Construction Project Supervisor, and he's going to share about the coordinated efforts taken by the City of Duluth to rebuild the Duluth Lakewalk, protecting it from storm damage and other hazards. So Mike, I saw you're on. If you want to share your slides and come on camera, I think the floor is now yours. Thank you for being here.
Okay.
Let me know if you don't.
I think I'm sharing the right screen. You see pictures of kittens instead, let me know.
I see a PowerPoint slide, so I think you're on track. And we're seeing, it looks like we're seeing the presenter view. So
Good,
if you want to go to the display settings and swap the screens, maybe that might solve it.
I see.
Yeah, if you go to, yep, and just put swap screens, maybe. Hey, look at that. Looks great, and I can hear you and see you, so take it away. Thanks, Mike.
All right, thank you very much for the invitation. I am recycling a presentation I've used a couple of times, but I think it's mostly pretty relevant to this conversation here. So I've been with the City of Duluth for just 6 years now. I have a long history before that in building things and managing the energy efficiency in buildings. With the city, we do a lot of things. My team manages anything that gets built on City of Duluth property, except for roads and utilities. So we manage all of our buildings, all of our construction projects and renovation of buildings. I have a background in energy efficiency and conservation and renewables, so I play a key role in those activities. We also work closely with the City Parks Department. We're separate, but we work closely with all of their projects, trails, other park structures and amenities. And when these big storms hit that affected our shoreline, we became the entity that's managing those repairs. So I'm gonna skip this. So our position in Lake Superior is sort of damning in some ways. When we get the strong northeast winds, which are common, they have a long way to build. So about 300 miles from the Canadian shore, straight through the slot into Western Lake Superior and piling into Duluth. Depending on, the Duluth shoreline stretches up the North Shore a ways, quite a ways. So when the waves hit those areas, it's a less direct hit. And, but when they plow right into the Minnesota Point, Wisconsin Point, the downtown area of Duluth, it's quite a blow. And so that's where we've had the most part damage, although we've had damage to all of Duluth City shoreline and on up the St. Louis County shore also. So, the storms in Lake Superior, nothing new. We've had, long history of storms causing damage, sinking ships, killing people. So that's not new. But there's, growing evidence that the frequency and severity of the storms is increasing. I also have figured out through this, learning lots of things, but we figured out that, as the glaciers are retreating from the area last time, Lake Superior was 450, almost 500 feet deeper. And so the shoreline was in a different place. So when that shoreline dropped, when the lake levels dropped to their current level, the shoreline that we're dealing with now is young in geological terms. And so what we see is a variety of shorelines up, through the area, some of which are robust, competent rock faces, and others are clay banks that are still kind of settling and adjusting. So when when us Europeans arrived and boldly started to build things on what we thought was a stable shoreline, we made some mistakes. And so we're seeing, enhanced new erosion, but the erosion's been going on for a long, long time. So we're trying to learn from that and make decisions that accommodate that. So as Sarah pointed out, you know, when we get these surges, it changes things. We had a series of storms that happened at a almost record time of almost record lake levels. So in these big storms with these various factors coming together, we saw 15 to 20 foot waves piling into Duluth. And like I said a minute ago, that the orientation really matters when the areas that are directly in line with those waves and that wind got hit really hard. Areas around the corner of the lake up the North Shore had more of a glancing blow. And so they suffered different kinds of and less damage. And so our mitigation efforts can be patterned a little differently. So we in Duluth, starting in October 2017, we entered a period of about 12 months with 3 storms in a row. October 2017, April 2018, and then again October 2018. So we barely could catch our breath between storms. So the first storm was pretty big. We filed for a disaster declaration. We were counseled to pare down our estimates, and so it ended up being a state disaster declaration, although the actual damage ended up being more than that amount. The April 2018 storm was smaller, but the frost was coming out of the ground. The raw shoreline that was damaged in the previous storm was soft because of the frost coming out, and so we had quite a bit of additional damage from that storm. That became a second state disaster declaration. And then about 6 months after that, we had the biggest of the 3 storms in October 2018, which hit really vulnerable, exposed shoreline and infrastructure and did a tremendous amount of damage at that point. That became a federal disaster. Between the 3 storms, which really became one repair effort. The estimate was around $30 million in repairs to city shoreline infrastructure. And I think to date, this is a couple months old, but at that point we had spent about 26 million. So at that point in repairs, we've just completed a couple more projects. So we're getting close to that $30 million estimate, which was surprisingly accurate. So it's been a struggle to try to manage those 3 different disaster declarations. Some spots were damaged in one storm, some in another, and some in all 3. And so the process of doing those repairs and keeping track of the cost and sorting them all out and attributing those costs to the various disasters has been a big task for us. We were pretty busy before these storms hit, and so we didn't get to add a body or 2 to do this work. We just had to fit in. I covered this. So this is section of the Lakewalk Trail near the Fitters complex. We were just in the process of starting emergency repairs just up the shore from where this photo was taken when this storm hit and ripped everything apart even more. So we just had to scrape it off and make construction access through there to be able to start to pick up the pieces. We learned a bunch about the assistance programs. which are all based, both state of Minnesota and federal FEMA public assistance programs are based on funding efforts to put things back exactly as they were before that event at current local market costs. So at least we're able to enact implement the repairs, and the cost is what it is. But it's very difficult to prove what the condition was before the storm, especially when they hit boom, 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 3 in a row like that. So in some areas, well, this photo shows clearly a lot of what we were dealing with. Historically, Duluth also is an industrial shoreline and not very well respected. When there was excess construction debris, sidewalks, roadways, private construction debris, it was just casually dumped along the lake shore. Eventually, when areas were sort of made more civilized for development, there was a sprinkling of riprap and larger revetment over this debris. But the storms peeled that away for us, and so what we were left with was the dumping grounds from decades and centuries past. So when we toured these sites with state and federal disaster assessment people, it's hard to show that we lost much of value. This trail in this photo is kind of a side shoot from the Lakewalk Trail between some private property and the shoreline. And it was obviously not much investment had been made in building this trail. And so the amount of money that we got to fix it was not enough to do anything that any engineer would sign off on today. Excuse me. So in this case and other cases, we made a choice to abandon that trail and to clean up the shoreline, rehabilitate it at minimal cost, and then retreat the trail farther away from the lake. Like I said, a lot of the shoreline was just casual fill, and we weren't able to get adequate funding without implementing some special measures. So both FEMA has a mechanism. We are able to negotiate a base cost based on what we lost, but then there's a 406, Chapter 406 hazard mitigation funding that we can almost double the amount of money we get. The idea being that we're getting additional funding to do a better job than what we lost. In the course of our working with the state of Minnesota and FEMA on these efforts, the state of Minnesota then made a decision. The Homeland Security and Emergency Management Office made a decision to adopt that same hazard mitigation approach to multiply their funding amounts. So that trail picture I showed a couple of slides ago with the trail all busted up was in this area. And this is what we went back with, using some of that hazard mitigation money to add of course, larger engineered revetment on the water's edge with 3 different classes of stone built and placed, not just dumped. And in addition to that, a heavily reinforced concrete wall to serve as a final barrier to resist whatever wave energy gets through the stone revetment, to protect the trail, lighting, and other amenities on the inland side of that. In all of our projects, we've also added stormwater management, because we know even if we can protect the infrastructure from the wave damage, the waves will still wash over everything and deposit lots of water on the inland side. So we've incorporated stormwater management measures to pick up that water and funnel it back out to the lake in a sustainable manner. We had damage. I'm going to focus on just a couple of projects, but we had damage all along the Duluth shoreline, and the surge, the high water levels and the surge actually backed up into the St. Louis River, into the estuary, and up the river. So as did the wind. So we had wave damage, water damage and wave damage way up the St. Louis River from the lake. So we're just now implementing some of those repairs to shoreline trails that were severely damaged in those events. I'm going to focus the rest of my time mostly on the Canal Park shoreline in Lakewalk, which was, a very, very important asset for the city of Duluth, for its residents, and for the visitors that come here to enjoy the lake. So this is a few years before the events. This is what was there. A wooden boardwalk, laying on the ground, more or less, on concrete stringers poured on the ground, lighting infrastructure and an asphalt trail, and some fairly casually deposited stone revetment. Back in the late 1970s, early 1980s, when Interstate 35 was extended through downtown Duluth, tunnels were built. A massive excavation was done through downtown, and almost 180,000 tons of rock and material were taken out of there, and much of it was placed along the shoreline, creating over 6 acres, I've read, of new shoreline. Some of it here, this is the parking ramp at the Fitkers complex. The Veterans Memorial is here now. And around the corner of the lake, this way is the Canal Park area where a lot of the fill was placed. But it was trucked in. There were I've seen design documents, but by the time I saw it, it didn't look like it was constructed. It was sort of a jumbled pile of deposited materials from this excavation. Duluth was hugely industrial, looking away from the lake for much of its history. This was the Canal Park area near where Grandma's restaurant is now. And it was an industrial wasteland, just dumping grounds with, there were automobiles piled up and just spilling into the lake. Lots of metal, lots of just concrete, other debris just casually dumped into the lake. So as part of that effort, when the freeway tunnels were built, there was a growing awareness that this was not the way to treat our shoreline. And so this was cleaned up. And we found in our excavations, we found some remains of some of this past history. So this was after the third of the storms in October, probably early November 2018. We kind of, for decades after my less severe storms, these things were moved around and just sort of straightened out and put back together and regraded. But after this storm in particular, there was nothing left. The actual earth underneath the trails and covering the buried electrical lines and everything else was gone. We had divers in the water aiding in the construction of our new assemblies here, and they found a lot of our revetment and some of these other materials a couple hundred yards out into Lake Superior, just kind of scraped away by the waves. We had a heck of a time managing the public interest in this during this period. We finally had to close off this area and do an emergency effort to scrape all these materials out of here. We salvaged the Ipe boardwalk and it's stockpiled. We're designing new projects to reuse it to protect dunes on the Park Point area, but there was a lot of materials just taken away from here. And it was graded out as a natural looking beach, which is actually pretty pleasant for a couple of years. This is the area of the Canal Park project, a little over a half mile of shoreline from the Duluth Ship Canal here. This last couple 100 feet is federal property with managed by the Army Corps of Engineers. They are now in design to connect to our shoreline revetment and seawall to bring it connected over to the Ship Canal. During big storms, the waves and the surge come in and come right over the side of the canal walls and flood this whole neighborhood now. So there is something coming. There's a time coming when I think this whole Canal Park neighborhood is going to have to raise up. We took the first step by raising our shoreline construction up 3 to 4 feet above where it had been, which created some issues with view sheds from hotels and stuff right now, but it's what we had to do. These are just a few cross sections from our design showing, well, this is existing, sorry. So this is from the original design, and it didn't look like anything like this by the time I saw it the first time. It had been rearranged by the storms. The stones were too small for Lake Superior, and the design was kind of casual. We changed that when what we built. We added the concrete wall. We started with 10 to 12 ton toe stones, actually excavated into lake bottom, sometimes 30, 40 feet out from the shoreline at that moment in time. And then an engineered stone revetment built behind that and sloping up. This is a massive construction, and our concrete wall, stormwater management, and new trails and new lighting infrastructure. So this is from, I think, December, year before last December, when we're finishing up construction in this area. You can see the size of the stones and the massive amount. There's we pre-purchased 76,000 tons of stone. Came from a quarry up near Two Harbors, Minnesota, and it takes a long time to produce that much stone. So we have a massive stockpile at the north end of the beach, and then put this out for bid and built it. So we have this massive stone revetment. You can see it extending down into the water. This concrete wall that goes down 10 feet below the surface to a massive footing. Where this van is parked is where the boardwalk is now. The black fabric you see is a bioswale, stormwater management. There's stormwater infrastructure integrated into this, and it's planted with a variety of shrubs and wildflowers right now, which we're still working to get established. This is at the north end of that area. This was a natural beach that has been fairly stable. It's very popular to us, where we stockpiled all this stone until we could use it. And so we rehabilitated this beach, and the biggest problem with this beach in the storms was that the pebbles and gravel would end up way inland, piling up on the ground and on top of the trail, sometimes 4 feet deep. So we built this wall and these stone breaks to keep the beach on the beach, essentially. I saw an air photo from the 1930s that, based on some infrastructure that we can still see, it made it look like the shoreline at that moment was about where the front of these hotels are now. So this has been man-made shoreline for a long, long time, and so we had to manage it aggressively to make it stay put. This is a little later in time when we had the boardwalk under construction and the rest of the time to come together. You can see the difference in grade here. Previously, you could walk down from this sidewalk towards the water. We raised all of this up, so now you have to walk back down to the surface. And that's been successful so far, although it has not been severely tested. It was a massive project. So we spent the stone, direct purchase for the stone here was about $5 million. Construction was about $11 million. And there'll be some ongoing costs to get all this area settled in. This is back near the Fitters complex. This was our second phase of, we're on phase 5 now, construction. We were sandwiched tightly here between the water and a railroad track. So we had to make do with what space we had. On the Canal Park stretch over in the distance here, we were able to retreat vertically to get away from, try to get away from the wave, the damage of the wave, power of the waves and the storm surge. In areas like this, we had fewer choices, and we're learning as we go. We are just kicking off a project on the Brighton Beach area where we took our tour that Sarah mentioned a while ago. And there we are retreating horizontally. We removed the road from, this is Canal Park again, we removed the road from the Brighton Beach area, and it's going to be rebuilt further up the hill. There's a new extension of the Lakewalk Trail through that park that is up above the waves that we've seen so far and that are predicted. And we're rehabilitating the shoreline in the Canal Park area to, the Brighton Beach area, to create a break between where we're letting the lake do its thing and recreate pebble beaches, and where we are in the formal park area. So we're creating a vegetated, soil-covered stone berm at that crest, the wave run-up area, to separate our formal park area from the shoreline. So we are planning for the future. We are have applied and received a FEMA Advanced Assistance Grant from their Hazard Mitigation Grant Program. We're doing a study from a little bit in the Canal Park, in the estuary side, the Canal Park recreation area, but mostly from the Brighton Beach area up the North Shore, joint project with St. Louis County to study the shoreline there, which is receding rapidly in some areas where it's the softer clay shoreline, and is threatening wayside rests and the road itself, Condon Boulevard, the scenic North Shore Drive. And so we have a team of engineers working on a suite of treatments for those shoreline areas, and another team of consultants that are working on a public outreach effort to involve the community in those efforts. We are, so again, our lessons learned have been to retreat whenever we can, because as I answer when I'm asked how well we expect some of this new work to hold up to the lake, my answer is usually we may not have seen yet what the lake can offer us in terms of severity of storms. And so we need to get out of harm's way wherever we can. And that, like I pointed out, can be horizontally where it's possible, or vertically where it's not. And we're using this growing toolkit, including heavily armored shoreline to protect our infrastructure, and stormwater management to deal with the the wave energy that gets over it. And then in certain areas where we can, we are abandoning infrastructure, getting it out of the way, rehabilitating the shoreline. And in the case of Brighton Beach and other areas, we're trying to rewild those shorelines, reestablish native plants, native shoreline forests and other plantings to try to work with nature, work with the lake instead of trying to fight it and hold it back. That's all I have. I'd be happy. I had to rush through some of that, so I'm trying to stay on track here, but I'd be happy to answer any questions.
No worries. Thanks for being here, Mike, and thank you for that presentation. We do have a few questions, and I want to make sure we have time for our group sharing session as well, but we had some good questions in the chat, so I'm gonna share at least a couple of those. So the first one was, what other data did you need for the disaster declarations besides before and after photos?
Good question. One of the hardest requests to meet were records of maintenance, because if you build something on the shoreline, according to FEMA and the state of Minnesota, if you build something and then don't maintain it, whether it's revetment, the infrastructure itself, the erosion control measures, the stormwater management, they're less inclined to want to give you money to rebuild it because you kind of let it go. Those records are really hard to establish and recover from, past decades of people moving through positions in the city. And we had a hard time with that. We had to do a lot of work to try to dig up work orders and other records, because it's how governments work. You build something and then you move on to the next project. Other than that, I think it's not so much in the disaster relief, but in our grants for assistance, we have to do a benefit cost analysis that includes social costs, threats to other infrastructure, things like that are really sort of fuzzy math. But it takes a tremendous amount of time to try to do a good job at trying to make those calculations. That I think has been one of our biggest challenges in trying to get money to beef up our shorelines before they fail. And that's a trend that I think is really hopeful that the agencies are moving in that direction to try to shift focus on hazard mitigation rather than disaster repairs.
Thanks for that explanation, Mike. We do have a couple of other questions within the chat, but I really want to make sure we have time for our group sharing time. I don't know if you have time to stick around, Mike, but if you did and you wanted to maybe I can follow up with you with some of the questions and see if we can get answers back to folks, just because I want to make sure we have time for group sharing. And if there seems time in the group sharing session to ask more questions and have those answered, then that can be fine too. But I think I'm going to go ahead and move on at this point, just to make sure we have enough time.
Good.
So
thank you.
So thank you for being here, Mike, and thank you for telling us all about that. I know you're also super busy, like the comment I had for Sarah. So thank you for taking time to be here today. Okay, folks. So as I mentioned at the start of the meeting, we're going to try something new now. We just wanted to make sure we give members the opportunity to connect with one another a bit more, since we haven't had many opportunities to do that virtually. So we're now going to open up the floor to you all to have time to share. So if you have any questions that you'd like to share in the presence of other coastal professionals, if you have any updates that you'd like to make to the group, maybe you have staffing changes where you work, or you have updates on projects that are ongoing and you want to share those with the group, that would be great. Don't feel pressured to share if you just want to listen, but know that you don't need to have any kind of formal presentation prepared. You can just share along. So yeah, if you'd like to give an informal update, feel free to raise your hand and we can call on you. Or if you're more comfortable sharing things in the chat, that's fine too. I will try not to just call you out. But we would love to hear from anybody who has any updates, any coastal hazards related questions you'd like to share with the group, or anything like that. So feel free to raise your hand if you'd like to speak that way, or utilize the chat. Are we going to have any brave individuals that want to make an update, or if we have any folks in the audience that, maybe you're a new member to Chaos, or maybe it's been a while since you've been to a meeting and you just want to introduce yourself, that would be fine too. Do that in the chat, or raise your hand and I can let you speak up. Just let me know. And I'm also seeing in the chat, folks are responding to you, Joanna. If you want to also pose your question to the group, that would be fine as well.
Hi, so I don't want to take over the group here because I'm not actually from Wisconsin, but I am interested in learning more about living shorelines or hybrid projects that work with the intense waves or SAISH events. And so thank you to the folks who have private messaged me with some tips for where to reach out to, but I would happily take any other advice anyone has.
And thank you for being here, Joanna. You are welcome no matter what state you are in.
Thank you.
Mike, I see you're still here. While we're kind of waiting to see if folks want to speak up, I'll go ahead and ask you another question if that's okay. About
Sure.
your presentation. What lessons did you learn from going through the disaster funding process that would be helpful for other communities?
It's slow. One thing I didn't mention is with the bulk of our funding, so FEMA disaster funding in Minnesota, anyways, becomes a 75% share from federal money and 25% is covered by Minnesota. And so the city had zero match. If we added to a project with other amenities that we wanted to build as part of the project. That was a city contribution. In the state disaster declarations, it's a 70, it's federal money funneled through the state, but it's 75% state money and 25% city match. So that's something to take seriously. And it takes a long, long time. It's a long process for the federal money. You're dealing with groups of people that are scattered throughout the country that can take months to get to a particular file to review it. And it gets kind of cross-pollinates between groups within FEMA. So it can be very slow, and you risk losing a construction season, or just losing to inflation as you wait for this process to work out. In our case, there's a not new method for FEMA to distribute disaster funding, where they partner with states to create what they call a state-led disaster. So it's still controlled by FEMA, but it's administered by state. In our case, Minnesota emergency management folks. And the state of Minnesota applied to FEMA to have the first state-led disaster for our events here. And so we were able to deal mostly directly with our folks from St. Paul, who became strong allies in helping us navigate the process and to optimize our returns, our dollar amounts by just guiding us through the process of how to package our applications. So that was a huge lesson. As we get increasing number of natural disasters, those staff members are spread increasingly thin. And so, we have harder time getting access, but it went very, very well from that standpoint for us here. And we were able to navigate through things that would have been very difficult to do on our own. I wasn't with the city during or after right after the 2012 flood, which was a huge disaster in Duluth. But I think that city staff had to manage a lot of that on their own, which was a huge burden for the city. So, and I guess an important part that might have been on one of my slides, but I didn't mention it, is that all of these the public assistance portion of the disaster funding are reimbursement based. So you have to finance all of that work. The city had to finance all of that work and then navigate the final reimbursement process, which I hear we just working through the last details of the 2012 flood with FEMA. So it's a huge burden, city bonding to borrow money to do the repairs, and then hope it turns out well in the end. That's a big, scary adventure.
An additional question we had in the chat, and I'm sorry if you've already addressed this, I just saw it myself. This was directly to you, Mike. Were long-term increases in lake levels due to the effects of climate change considered in the design of this revetment? And this person also said recently published research suggests we may see an approximate increase of 1 foot in storm surge elevations for design events on Lake Superior.
You cut out through some of that, but I think I caught it. We had to rely on coastal engineers that we hired to design this stuff. and they claimed to be in touch with the latest predictions, about those things. I will say that I personally, twice during the Canal Park project, urged increased height 1 foot, and then later in the design process, another foot in our final grade. Just a gut feeling that, because I sat in my car during the October 2018 storm, and it was pretty humbling. And the shoreline, the buildings, the bridge, the canal, everything around looked really small. And so I felt like we had one chance to do it right. And we didn't get any pushback from FEMA anyways on that additional expense. It costs a lot. So you have to justify each one of those things. So I think a good piece to remember in all of that is the slow evolution of awareness. If you have to find the money, and you have to convince the funders to fund every additional dollar based on crystal ball work is what all of this is. We can look at patterns and we can look at predictions about climate change and stuff, but we're still making, guesses about what's coming. It's pretty hard to have a straight face and claim you know that.
Thank you for that response, Mike. And sorry I was cutting out. I'm glad you heard my question. I'm seeing a conversation happening in the chat between Jared and Joanna. So great, thank you. If you need to come off mute and ask your questions or talk on the screen, that is totally fine as well. But thank you, everybody. And I do see conversations happening and resources being traded in the chat. So thank you for participating in the chat. And thank you for earlier providing some field trip ideas. There were some really great brainstorming ideas happening in the chat there. So thank you all for doing that. I'll give folks just a moment more if anybody wants to speak up and ask any more questions or make any updates or anything like that. Otherwise, I can give you a couple minutes of your afternoon back to you.
Hey, this is Jared. I had asked the question of you, Mike. I appreciate your response. I understand that it is really hard to kind of try to predict future lake levels, and yeah, coastal storms on Superior can be pretty impressive and pretty daunting. So that is, I'm not surprised that you pushed for that, and I understand that that is really expensive. Is the design report for that structure publicly available somewhere, or is that something that you could share?
It looks like he might have dropped off the call. I'm sorry, Jared.
I guess
do you want to pop that either in the chat or just jot it down, and I can reach out to Mike after the meeting and get a response for you. Yeah. He may have had something come up, or he may have accidentally fallen off the meeting. Like that happens sometimes. So yeah, if you want to send me the question, I can get a response for you, Jared.
And I guess, Joanna, thank you for sharing the location that you're talking about here. That is a pretty big stretch of shoreline. In general, I guess just the question for you that I would have is what is the type of shoreline where you're experiencing these problems that you're trying to address? Are these on bluffed shorelines? You have gravel beaches, sand beaches? Are there revetments already built? What are just trying to get an idea of what you're your situation is like.
Yeah, sure. We have a lot of different types of shoreline all along. So there's definitely bluff areas. We have a lot of gravel beaches that used to be sand beaches. And so we're grappling with the fact that we think because so many homeowners have built retaining walls, that we're not getting the sand renourishment that we used to. And so I think that's why New York State is pushing for us to go with more living shorelines. But when it comes to a homeowner wanting to protect their home, they're not willing to just plant a couple of plants and hope that it's going to handle a 16 to 20 foot SAIS event, you know? So we're trying to come up with some hybrid ideas, or at least if you're going to use rock, planting a riparian buffer at the top of it or something along those lines to try to deal with that a little bit. But we're looking for examples wherever we can.
Handling those exact conditions with a 16-foot SAIS, I'm not sure, but I understand that, you know, trying to create a living shoreline in a high energy environment is really hard. That's actually something that I've been working on a project on Lake Superior, trying to do in Upper Michigan and the city of Marquette for the past few years. I guess it's really difficult because you have those two conflicting, you know, desires. One, you want to protect the shoreline, which implies, you know, trying to keep something stationary, and two, you want to have a living environment, which inherently implies letting things change.
Yeah.
And letting things change takes up more space, and sometimes is a bit more expensive and conflicts with what property owners want. In, I guess, the example of project that I've been working on, you know, we've been trying to approach this similar problem with a dynamic revetment solution. So that's still placing stone on the shoreline, but smaller stone. So the size of either gravel on the small end, or in our case, you know, large cobbles. So we're looking at 4 to 8 inch cobbles. But placing a large mass of those on the shoreline, and the idea is that it can change in response to changing wave conditions, so that the profile of that structure is able to adapt to different wave conditions and lake levels and move around, but not quite as much as a sandy shoreline would. And that is more mimicking a natural shoreline and should provide habitat. The downsides that we've encountered going with that approach are that you end up using more material. It takes up more space on the shoreline, and it's very difficult to permit. So I'm not sure what the situation is like in New York, but in Michigan, it's been a really hard process to try and get that structure permitted.
Yeah, that sounds like a challenge, but that sounds interesting. I would love to hear how that ends up working out.
Well, my fingers are crossed. Hopefully we'll find out in the next month or so, and I'll be happy to share.
Thank you.
Thank you guys for that that conversation. I like to see these conversations happening, but I'm also going to recognize that it is 2:30, so I'll wrap things up here. If you have any questions for either of our speakers, or if you need to connect with somebody that you know, had a comment or something today and you want to reach out to me, you could do that. I popped my email in the chat again. Thank you today for both of our speakers, Sarah and Mike, for being here. We really appreciate them taking their time out of their busy schedules to be here with us. So, and thank you, members, for attending today's chaos meeting, and we hope to see you at our next quarterly chaos meeting in December or January. Thank you, and have a great rest of your afternoon.